Good to go? Yes? Yes. Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. It's good to be here at the Press Theatre at the provincial legislature on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nation. I'm here today to update British Columbians on how the restart is going of our economy and talk about a range of issues as part of my regular media availability weekly. I think there's great reasons for optimism as we look at how our restart has been going across the province. We've continued to see relatively low cases, new cases of COVID-19, which speaks to the best approach that we could come up with, which was a gradual restart of the economy. We've seen some really positive indicators when it comes to public transit, ferry use, all going up, not even remotely close to the numbers that we had pre-pandemic, but we've seen successes. More and more people are coming out of their homes, participating in the economy, going to restaurants, shopping in retail outlets, and participating, broadly speaking, in the restart of our economy. We've seen examples like a $500 million investment by CN Rail here in British Columbia. Private sector investments like that are critical to our success going forward, and there are increasing numbers of companies that are looking at British Columbia as having successfully flattened the curve, having a skilled, dynamic, multicultural workforce that can help them advance their business interests. That means more private sector investment, which means more activity in the economy for people. We've also seen 24 television and movie of the week productions return to British Columbia, and we're hopeful that we'll get back to the full complement of TV and movie productions before the end of the summer. Every Thursday, I meet with premiers across the country, and we talk about the issues that are challenging for us collectively. I also meet with my Economic Recovery Task Force, which is business leaders, labor leaders, not-for-profit representatives, and Indigenous peoples, to talk about how they see the restart going and what they want to see as part of our plan to build a better British Columbia going forward. And I hear over and over again that people want us to continue to focus on the values that we brought to play before the pandemic, focusing on climate action with our Clean BC plan, working on restoration of relationships across the province, challenging people to do their best to make British Columbia as good as it can possibly be. That means making sure that our education system is robust and is fully operational as we can make it. A number of issues have arisen over the past number of months when it comes to education. We are the only province in the country that got kids back into a classroom in the past school year so that we can have good data and a better understanding of the challenges we'll face come September. Minister Fleming's been working with stakeholders up to July and will continue to work through the summer so that we can have a robust plan in place so that parents, teachers, and kids can have a good understanding of what the world will look like come September when we reopen our classrooms. So on balance, I'm pretty excited about where we are. I think about the past 4 months have been extremely challenging for British Columbians. We're far from out of the woods. COVID-19 is in British Columbia. We are doing our best to flatten the curve. We're taking advice from public health officials. We're spreading that as far as we can, and the public is responding. I have a friend who's been traveling the province, going from the Lower Mainland to the north to help with the arrival of a new grandchild. And he reports back to me that he has been visiting communities throughout the interior and into the northwest. People are adapting. People are finding ways to make do in this extraordinary time. It's the resilience of British Columbians that have allowed us to be in this privileged position in Canada, quite frankly, where we are tackling the public health issues head on, but also recognizing that our economy needs to continue to operate. Dr. Henry was very helpful in not putting in place obstacles, but rather identifying ways that we could work together in a healthy way so that our economy did not need to come to a complete stop. And we're paying dividends today as private sector investments look to BC as the place to be in the months and years ahead. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
A reminder to reporters on the line, please press *1 to get in the queue for a question. If you've already pressed *1, press it again just to ensure you get in the queue. Our first question today goes to Michelle Bernoro.
Hi there. Mr. Premier, women with family inside Lynn Valley Care Home at the start of the COVID-19 outbreak say many of the shocking things that were happening in Ontario and Quebec care homes were also happening here. They say they witnessed seniors crying out for help and no one answering for a long time, seniors lying in urine-soaked clothing, seniors not being fed, seniors COVID positive, wandering to rooms of those who were not infected. And they say some of the things that were being said publicly about what was happening inside didn't happen until days later, such as cleaning and extra staff. Mr. Premier, will you commit to a public inquiry?
I don't know if that's the right way forward, quite frankly. We absolutely want to hear from families who have loved ones in care facilities, and we want to see where we were, where we are, and where we need to go. And I believe we can do that through dialogue with public health officials, with operators, with the various health authorities across the province. And most importantly, we need to hear from families. And I don't believe you need a public inquiry to do that. My email box is always available. If people want to send me their views, what they saw, what they feel, what their concerns are. But I think we've had a tremendous response here in British Columbia, and that is, at the root of it, of course, is healthcare workers making the commitment to do better during this very, very difficult time. And the results today are far superior to what they were months ago. I'm not for a minute going to try and erase the situation that some of these families saw and felt at the time, but I'm very confident that we've gone well past that, and we're in a position, unlike any other province in the country, where we can be quite proud of the work that we've done and acknowledge that we have much more work to do.
Michelle, do you have a follow-up?
Well, yes, thank you. Mr. Premier, they say that some of the issues that they saw, particularly with staffing levels and, seniors falling, no one being able to help them, just their care needs being met, they saw some of these things long before the COVID-19 pandemic hit. And from many people that I've spoken to, they say staffing levels in care homes across the province, in many cases, are not adequate. Do you believe that they need more staff in care homes to better care for fragile seniors in BC?
I absolutely agree with that. When we were sworn in as a government, the seniors advocate, Isabel McKenzie, had just issued a report that showed that the vast majority, I think it was 86% of long-term care facilities, were not meeting the provincial standard for hours of care per resident. That was the public record in 2017. And that was the result of many, many, many years of neglect, underfunding, and trying to squeeze more people into places that they could not fit, and not adequately building new infrastructure so that we could have state-of-the-art facilities so that our healthcare workers could provide the care that seniors so desperately needed. So was there a problem when we arrived? Absolutely. Was there a problem 5 months ago? To be sure. The advantage, the silver lining for long-term care in British Columbia from the pandemic, although we have regrettably dozens and dozens of deaths of people because of the outbreaks in long-term care facilities, we have learned from those experiences. We were on the right track leading into this. We've got more learnings now, and we'll be better going forward.
Just before we go to our next person, a reminder that we're allowing one question and one follow-up today. And our next question is from Tanya Fletcher.
Hi, Premier. I'm wondering if you can react to the $343 billion federal deficit and what that means for British Columbians. Can you confidently say that infrastructure projects here in BC that heavily...
I believe I can say that, Tanya. I'm confident that the federal government has been very aggressive at getting dollars into the economy, many of those dollars through provinces. We've been meeting, I think, 15 consecutive weeks. We're not, the Prime Minister is on a down week. We're not meeting with federal officials this week, but premiers will continue to meet. And we've been focusing throughout the pandemic on how we can get dollars, public dollars, into the marketplace to stimulate activity and to keep people whole. The CERB funding has been extended. We have programs here in British Columbia that complement those. The number, quite frankly, was staggering. $343 billion is something that is almost, well, it's incomprehensible for regular people, quite frankly. But that is July. And we have many, many months ahead of us in this fiscal year, as well as many, many months ahead of us in dealing with COVID-19. What we need to do here in British Columbia is make sure that those resources that we do have are stewarded appropriately and are targeted on making sure that we get long-term sustainable jobs out of those investments. When it comes to public infrastructure, roads, highways, bridges, schools, hospitals, we'll continue. We have the largest capital plan BC has ever had. We have matching dollars coming from the federal government. Just the last week, Minister Robinson and Minister McKenna from Ottawa announced hundreds of millions of dollars of investments in British Columbia, and there's more to come. I'm very confident that we're going to meet our targets on infrastructure, and we need to, quite frankly, do more. We have now an opportunity to not just keep pace, but to look at where we can make strategic investments, and that's where the $1.5 billion recovery fund is going, and that's what we're having discussions with business, with labor, with regular people through our dialogue for reframing our future online. That's what we're trying to accomplish, is to find the place that British Columbians want us to get to, and we'll put the resources to that.
Do you have a follow-up, Tanya?
Yes, please. Thank you. On another topic, David Hughes, the former federal government geoscientist, he's a specialist in alternative forms of energy, has crunched the numbers, and he has a new report for the Centre for Policy, Canadian Policy Alternatives. It says LNG production will not help reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and BC will not be on target to meet its emission reductions with the current levels of oil and gas production. So I'm wondering what your response is to that.
I haven't seen the report. I know that our Clean BC plan does have space for the LNG Canada project. We worked on that plan with Dr. Weaver, with the Green Caucus, and with stakeholders across the province, including the BC Business Council, and we made trade-offs at that time. We knew that there would be an increase in greenhouse gas emissions with a large LNG investment in Kitimat. And so we talked to the business community and said, is this the direction you want to go? Are you prepared to reduce your emissions to create space for a new emitter into the marketplace? And the answer was a resounding yes. So we built our plan based on that. It is an aggressive plan. It's the strongest in the country, and I stand by those numbers. I'll take a look at the report after this conference, but I'm confident that we're on track. And George Heyman, the minister responsible, is watching this very, very closely. Bruce Ralston, the Minister of Energy, is managing these issues to the best of our ability, and I do believe that we're going to continue to lead the country when it comes to emission reductions and also having an aggressive plan to keep our economy moving.
Our next question is from Ian Bailey.
Premier, any comment on the Canadian Association of Police Chiefs' suggestion today about the decriminalization of a lot of illegal, illicit drugs? Is this something you support? Is it something you have some concerns about? What would you say?
Well, thanks for the question, and I do support it. I firmly believe we have been here in British Columbia in a public health emergency for over 5 years when it comes to opioid overdoses. We have put in place new resources. We have a standalone Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions. We've been making investments in communities. We've been doing our level best to reduce dependency, to create opportunities for those who have moments of clarity within their addiction to be helped. When they reach out, we want to be there for them. But this fundamental question that Adam Palmer, the Vancouver Police Department chief and the head of the National Chiefs outlined today, is where I believe we need to go. If not now, when? We're in the midst of a global pandemic when it comes to COVID-19. In British Columbia, that is further complicated by an overdose crisis, which saw last month the highest monthly number of deaths that we've seen in a good long time. Anything that we can do to reduce the deaths and to reduce the dependence and to, quite frankly, free up law enforcement to do other things, I support. The challenge, of course, is that these are largely criminal code issues, and it'll require the federal government to lead on this. I've made it clear to the Prime Minister where British Columbia stands. We will stand with the federal government in any way to do what we can to help people who are in distress. And I don't have serious experience with addictions other than being a smoker in my past, but we need as a society to come together and say we cannot allow our brothers and sisters, our mothers and fathers, our neighbors to continue to succumb to overdose deaths because we're not prepared to do everything we can to reduce that likelihood. This proposal by the police chiefs will help in that regard, and I support it.
Do you have a follow-up, Ian?
in making this happen. Yeah. What can your government do, and what will your government do to back the chiefs up in making this happen?
Well, a couple of things. As I said, we have been doing more than any other province by creating a standalone minister responsible so that every day someone at the cabinet table is responsible for coming up with new and innovative ways to help people who are struggling with addictions. That has led to other provinces following suit. The federal government is very interested in the programs that we have in place in terms of harm reduction, in terms of addressing issues for people with addictions, alternative therapies. Dr. Henry has some very innovative ideas in this regard that I know she shared with her federal colleagues on the public health side. I believe that British Columbia stands ready to work with the federal government in this area, and I'm quite proud that it was Adam Palmer, Vancouver police chief, that led the conference today, and I know that he, among chiefs across the country, has more experience in this regard than any of them. We're reviewing the Police Act, first time in 46 years, for the very reason that Adam suggested in his conference today. We can't have law enforcement doing work that's better done by health officials. We can't have law enforcement doing work that can be better done by others. That's a good opportunity for us to have this dialogue and discussion. I'm very pleased that we have an all-party committee that will be spanning the province over the next number of months to listen to British Columbians, to listen to people who are concerned about the lack of trust between law enforcement and community. Dealing with systemic racism is critically important part of that, but there are a whole host of other issues that can and will be addressed by this committee. They'll bring forward recommendations, and it will be an all-party committee. And again, I think if we can remove partisanship from these debates, we get a better outcome. We've seen that over the past number of months when it comes to responding to COVID-19. By having everyone on the same page, regardless of how they vote, allows us to get faster to places where everybody wants us to be. And I think we can do that when it comes to the overdose crisis, and we can do that when it comes to law enforcement.
Our next question is from Vaughn Palmer.
Good day, Premier. Thanks for taking my call. One setback for the economy last month was the indefinite closure of the pulp mill in Mackenzie. And I gather that you've had a conference call with forest industry. Some people in the industry tell me they thought you were a little hard on the industry, but in any event, you expressed some disappointment. Could you give some indication of what your expectations are of the forest industry, not just in connection with Mackenzie, but in the broader sense going forward, please?
Sure. I had a conference call with the Council of Forest Industries a few weeks back. We've been working very diligently, trying to be as cooperative as we can be with an industry, quite frankly, that is in transition. It has been for a number of years, but since we were sworn in 2017, we've seen basically the end of the beetle kill wood, which means that the fiber basket is smaller than it's ever been. The former government was well aware of this. There were numerous reports done over a decade projecting that there was going to be a reduction in capacity within the sector, meaning fewer mills, meaning fewer jobs. I reminded the forest companies that by and large, the forests that they work in are not theirs. They're public forests. They have tenure arrangements, contracts with the people of British Columbia to harvest that wood, and those contracts historically have meant that there'd be a benefit to communities. And the Mackenzie issue is particularly pronounced because there are a number of companies that operate there, Conifex, Canfor, Paper Excellence, and others, all within small Mackenzie. And they all have a responsibility to make sure that the forest work that they do not just benefits their shareholders, but benefits the communities where they operate. We put in place a timber supply table in Mackenzie to bring all of the players together, Indigenous peoples, community leaders, labor leaders, industry leaders at the highest level to work these issues through. We haven't found success yet, but I'm going to continue to work on that. And I wanted to make it clear to industry that I very much value their historic contribution to the economy and the well-being of British Columbians, but they have an obligation to the future as well. And together, we can get there. Separately, we can't.
Do you have a follow-up, Vaughn?
Yes, please. I see at about the same time that Canfor has invested in 3 sawmills in Sweden purchased them outright. Do you think that's a comment on their part on what British Columbia is like as an investment community these days?
I think that's a simplistic response to a complex issue. We're in the midst of yet another battle with the United States with respect to duties on our softwood lumber products. This is a regular occurrence, Vaughn. You've written about this, the great war between Canada and the United States, at least a dozen times over your career at different points. So this is not new. But it's different this time because the industry has contracted so much in British Columbia. The beetle wood is a part of that. Reduced fiber is another part of that. Consolidation in the industry is another part of that. And Canfor will make business decisions in the interest of their shareholders. I respect that. And they have made significant investments in the United States, in Sweden, and in other parts of the world. And that is absolutely their right. But if they're wanting to access public timber in British Columbia, they need to ensure that they're meeting the requirements of participation in our economy here. And I have a very good working relationship with the leadership at Canfor. I have a good working relationship with Kofi. But if we can't speak candidly to each other about challenging times, then we're just dancing around the maypole. I'm not prepared to do that. I didn't seek public office to pacify people. I sought public office to make positive change in people's lives. And I know that we can do that if we all acknowledge that the only way that we can benefit from the bounty in British Columbia is if we have investment. The only way investment will happen is if we have a skilled workforce. And the only way any of that will happen is if we have an acknowledgement and a recognition that Indigenous peoples have rights and title on land in British Columbia. That's an undisputable fact based on successive court rulings, and as well as the obviousness of a nose in the front of your face. So all of us working together on this is the way forward. I am not at all disappointed. I am in fact optimistic about our future. Mass timber is an area that the industry said they wanted to pursue. I believe that more value and less volume is the only way the industry will continue to thrive in British Columbia. And I think the vast majority of companies understand that, and we're going to work towards that in the months ahead.
Our next question is from Lisa Yuzda.
There's been a call for the Prime Minister and Premiers to shift strategies when it comes to dealing with COVID. 18 experts, including former public health officers, signing onto a letter asking governments to stop focus on eliminating the virus, but focus on coping with it, also develop a national school strategy. So I'm wondering, in your conversation with the Premiers this morning, does this letter change anything in your approach? Is this part of the conversation with Premiers and the feds?
I haven't seen the letter, and if you could just say, you said a national something strategy, and it cut out. What I didn't get that part.
A national school strategy for returning kids to school.
Okay.
And so maybe there seems to be growing pressure to work on coping with the virus instead of just eliminating it. And I'm wondering how that might affect the approach here in BC.
We have been, our approach, Lisa, from the beginning has been coping with the virus. Dr. Henry's been pretty clear. It's here, and it's going to be here until we find a way to eradicate it. And that's underway internationally. Never before have so many resources and so many incredibly intelligent people been brought together to find a vaccine and to find therapies for COVID-19. In the interim, we have to find ways to manage and cope with the disease. And that's what we've been doing in British Columbia to very good effect. But we're under no illusion that COVID-19 is gone. We now have to figure out how we operate while it's here. And that's why the restart plan that we announced back in May is taking hold now. We see industries or sectors like hospitality, retail, finding ways to operate with the virus at the front of their minds, because public confidence is critical to success in our economy. And if people do not feel safe when they're going shopping, when they're going out for dinner, they're not going to do it. They're going to find some other way to achieve their end results. And that's why we have a plan to cope with the disease. When it comes to education, we are the only province in the country that will have real evidence of how to operate in classrooms and virtually simultaneously, because we've got the month of June to look back on, where 38 or so, almost 40% of kids voluntarily came back to classrooms, so that teachers, administrators in schools and school boards across the province, which are all different, of course. The needs in Quesnel are not the same as the needs in Nelson or in Victoria or in Prince Rupert. So having an approach that is district by district, almost school by school, is far superior in my mind than a national strategy. I listened to the President of the United States talk about his fount of wisdom and knowledge on what's best for public education in the United States. And I say I would prefer to talk to school board trustees, superintendents, teachers, and parents about what's in the best interest of their kids. That's what we've been doing. Minister Fleming has worked very, very hard to get us into classrooms in June so that we can use that information to prepare for September. And we will have, in my opinion, and I don't want to be too boastful, but because we have that experience that other provinces don't have, I think we'll be better prepared for September than any other province in the country.
Lisa, do you have a follow-up?
I do. And regarding this idea of learning to live with the virus, seeing airlines from the States, hotels here encouraging Americans to come up, so that it seems like they're sort of hedging their bets about the border opening, seeing this making some British Columbians nervous. Wondering, is it possible that if the borders do open, is it possible that these around our provincial border, or will we go with what happens? And is seeing these offers, like even at the Hotel Grand Pacific here, seeming to signal that the border is going to open sooner rather than later?
Well, I appreciate that there are many businesses in British Columbia that would like to see the border open so there can be an increase in traffic. Millions of people come through British Columbia on a normal year, and they're not coming this year. And this is not just about the United States, it's about international travelers. And it is not just because Canada has said we don't want to see our borders open until we see other countries in the world having the same level of success that we have. This is a global pandemic, and I think that we need to remind ourselves of that periodically, that we are not an island here in British Columbia. We are 5 million souls in a 7 billion soul sea of humanity on the globe, everyone trying to grapple with how do we deal with and cope with, as you said in your question, how do we cope with COVID-19? And one way we cope with that is by reducing the spread of the virus. And that means not inviting jurisdictions that have not had the same level of success as we have to just come and have a visit. I don't think the dollars that would be invested in the tourist economy are worth the risk to public health. And as it turns out, the vast majority of British Columbians agree with me on that.
Our next question is from Richard Zisman.
On the border issue, what's your understanding of what essential workers coming into Canada from the United States can do here? Can they stay overnight here in British Columbia? And what sort of activities can they participate in aside from the essential work that they are doing?
Again, those are largely public health issues. Richard, I know you've got access to Dr. Henry and Minister Dix either later today or tomorrow, and they'll be more than happy to answer that question. What I can say is that at the Premier's level, when I'm engaging with other Premiers across the country on the border and on the importance of maintaining supply lines, this was a critical issue in April and May and into June. Now we've got our handle around how we get goods and services into retail outlets so British Columbians can access them. We need to also understand that there's other work that involves people coming into Canada, whether they be consultants, whether they be, in the case of the film industry, front of camera talent or post-production advice to our businesses here in British Columbia. We're going to need to make sure that, once the self-isolation period, the quarantine period of 14 days has expired, those individuals, in my opinion, are free to engage in other activities as all British Columbians are. Mindful that physical distancing is critically important. If you can't physically distance, you should probably wear a mask. And also, of course, keep your hands as clean as you can and don't scratch your face, which I desperately want to do right now. I'm going to do it anyway. There you go. Sorry. Apologies. Driving me crazy. 3 questions.
Follow up, Richard.
Sorry.
I do, and this one is more political. We're seeing some businesses, Brandy Show Lounge, most publicly declaring that they are no longer going to accept Americans coming into their establishment. Do you believe that it's good business for BC businesses to say Americans are not allowed into our establishment during this pandemic? And do you see that as a potential way to protect from the spread of the virus?
Well, again, businesses will make their own choices on how they operate. That particular business, I don't know if singling out Americans is the issue. I think, as my understanding of the briefing I've had, is that there were too many people in a confined space without adhering to the WorkSafe BC guidelines that were developed with public health. So I won't comment on the business practices of one company. I will say it would be interesting to be involved in the contact tracing calls when it comes to that establishment.
And we have time for one more question today, and that'll be from Fran Yanner.
Thank you. Hello, Premier. My question is on the tiny house warriors near Blue River who are protesting the Trans Mountain expansion. You may be aware of this sort of escalating dynamics happening over there. Recently, two First Nation chiefs denounced the encampment and their tactics, and then called on the group to leave. And the Simp First Nation chief, Shelley Long, said at a public meeting, it's the province's job to control the protest or end it, and that they were going to approach the province. She also said that she thought it was her impression that you were against the pipeline, and that might be an explanation for the government's unwillingness to act in terms of ending this protest. Do you have a comment?
Well, certainly I've not heard directly from the chief. It hasn't come to my desk if she has corresponded with me. I do know that the title holders on the land should be the ones that make determinations about what takes place on that land, particularly if it is a demonstration that's highlighting Indigenous rights and title. So obviously I defer to the chief to make determinations on her land about what happens there. With respect to the pipeline itself, we have gone to court. We have put in place regulations. We have done everything we can to draw attention to our view that Vancouver as an export terminal for diluted bitumen is not the best use of our gateway to the world. And Vancouver and British Columbia certainly wants to make sure that we're protecting those things that are special to us. And my job, and now that the decisions have been made, Supreme Court rulings have been rendered, the federal government bought the pipeline, is to make sure that the proponent is living up to the requirements of their environmental certificates, and that we're doing everything we can to protect the coast. With respect to the corridor and those that may well be trespassing on it, I'll leave that to the title holders. If there's been a call to me to have something done, I don't direct law enforcement. If there are laws being broken, the police should address that. And again, if the chief has more issues, I'm happy to talk to her about it.
Do you have a follow-up, Fran?
Yes, please. Just on the similar subject, the Blue River residents and also Simp First Nation community members have all said that they've been having to deal with continuing harassment from the Tiny House Warrior members, and that, again, I guess it reaches into the RCMP, but there seems to be an impression that the RCMP are unable to act effectively to control the situation or stop the harassment in their view. Do you have any advice for these community members and First Nation members?
Yeah, well, I do. I mean, I appreciate their frustration, and this is a challenge, and why it's so important that we do a review of the Police Act as we're undertaking right now. Law enforcement doesn't know from day to day, I think, where their responsibility begins and ends. My view is if laws are being broken, the police should respond. And if the chief and other community members feel that their liberty is being impinged by other people, they should call the cops. I cannot tell the cops what to do, but if citizens who are there charged with protecting have concerns, they should raise that with local law enforcement, and law enforcement, in my opinion, should respond to that. If there's a chain of command issue, it does not stop in my office. That's for the police to determine.
Thank you, everyone. That's all the time
Thanks,
we have.
everybody.